rather familiar and extremely important gospel message. Mary and Martha. How many of us in our world can sympathize with that message? Give me a hand. I'm doing all the work. My goodness, it's pervasive, isn't it? And yet, what we're supposed to take away from this, I believe, is the ability, amidst all of the work of our world, all of the important tasks that we're about, all the things we need to do, are supposed to do, are required to do, amidst all of that, to be able every once in a while to step back and find room for God to speak in our lives. To cultivate that place where we can recognize God's voice and then follow where God will lead. That's not easy. Sometimes we find the space, but we haven't done it often enough, or in a way in which we're able to recognize how God is speaking to us. Sometimes we find the space and we think we hear what God is saying, but we're not completely open to what God might be saying because it's too surprising. It's too challenging. God may be asking too much, and we haven't cultivated that space of listening to God. One of the best ways that you and I can be about cultivating holy space in our lives is by going on a pilgrimage. By going on a pilgrimage, I don't mean having to go to Canterbury Cathedral and getting a pilgrim's token and walking up to Becket's tomb on our knees. That's a wonderful way to do pilgrimage, which thousands of people have done, but we don't need to do that. Pilgrimage is as simple as seeking a physical space in order to make an inner change. And we can find a physical space to make an inner change just about anywhere. We can find it by dedicating a little portion of our home to become a place of prayer. We can find it by going out to some beautiful space in our city of Columbus that is bursting with life, perhaps the Rose Garden or the Arboretum, and taking some time to be mindful about God there. It can be finding a retreat center or a favorite place in which we are attentive to listening to God's voice. That pilgrimage, that physical space where we can make and be open to an inner spiritual change. Yesterday morning, a group of us were gathering for the last time on a little hillside in Lalibor, Guatemala, having just finished building our alpha latrine. Now, latrines are very exciting things, I can tell you. Came back to the States quite late yesterday, and the customs officer said, "Well, what were you doing in Guatemala?" And I said, "Building a latrine." And he said, "Well, I suppose they need them everywhere, don't they?" I said, "Yes, but these are very special latrines because these latrines are built in a spiritual manner in order to help a family make a real physical change in their environment. By enabling a family to create a healthy area that's producing fertilizer for them, which is called a composting latrine, as most of you know, it really can change the life of a group of people. Last year, we had to go on a tremendous hike. It was over a mile, down a hill, up a hill, down a steep mud hill, and lug all of this stuff to make this latrine and go across these logs under which this really dirty brook, smelly brook, flowed from the outhouse of the family that we were building a latrine for. And this year we went to visit that family, and none of us were afraid now of falling off the logs because the water that was running under the logs was clean. It was clear because they had been using the latrine that we built for them last year. And it's a special feeling of accomplishment when you see that physical change. And in that physical space, in that physical moment, being open to God speaking to us in an inner way, in a spiritual way. This year's family was no different. We built the latrine on the side of a very steep hill. And when we didn't have to log things too far, we had to make a flat space on the hill to build the latrine, which meant that we're working on a real steep incline the whole time. Imagine mixing cement by hand, bag after bag, on an incline. The water tends to try to run down the hill, and you're getting the cement back up and constantly making this thing. And the family, the father of the family, kept wanting to bring us Kool-Aid. And he was very well-meaning, but the water supply in La Labour isn't one that you make Kool-Aid out of. It's infested with a little something called E. coli, which doesn't do too well in our American digestive system. So they would bring the Kool-Aid, and we'd try to pawn it off on the Guatemalan workers and the children who were with us, just because their systems are accustomed to it. They can drink this stuff all day long, and it's not going to bother them. For them, it's a treat to have Kool-Aid. For us, it's a recipe for having a tummy trouble. Anyway, halfway through the week, the father realized that we couldn't do this. So he disappeared for an hour. And he came back one noon, having walked 1.5 miles in each direction to the little village store, spent a week's salary on a 3-liter bottle of 7-Up. Oh. Came back, handed us this bottle, sent the children off to bring glasses, which they'd washed. Sent them back for towels, so now they've dried the glasses. Oh, thank goodness. And we all enjoyed a semi-cold 7-Up. That was a sacramental moment, my friends, to share that with them. A spiritual interchange took place amongst the travelers as we participated more nearly in the life-changing moment with that family. This has been an extraordinary trip to Guatemala, and you're going to hear more about it, not from me, but from fellow travelers. So I don't want to steal their thunder. Suffice to say that in our busy, work-filled, task-filled, Mary, Martha, decision-filled world, we took a little time to open up our souls to make a spiritual change. And I think a lot of us are deeper for having done that. And I'd like to uplift to all of us today the idea that we don't have to get on an airplane. We don't have to go far. We can walk down the street. It's simply making an effort to set aside a physical place, a physical environment where we're open to a spiritual message from God and cultivating that place in our lives. That's the gospel today. I'd like to close with a favorite quote of mine from Sister Teresa Elias. She's a Roman Catholic nun who leads pilgrimages, and I've been blessed over the years to go on a couple of her pilgrimages. And she writes, "We go on pilgrimage in order to learn how to become pilgrims in our own lives. For too many of us are merely tourists." What is it that's the difference between being a tourist in life and being a pilgrim for God? In Christ's name. Amen.
So this is the top of the hill on which the home where we're building the latrine, which you can see in front of you, sits. It's a rather dangerous or treacherous precipice, as you can see me attempt to descend it. This is the rainy season right now in Guatemala, and it rained quite considerably last night. So as I try to descend the hill, it'll give you a sense as to how this family gets down to one of the paths that get them back into La Labor. So I'm doing this very carefully. As you can see my feet, try to navigate this without slipping and falling, and just give you a sense as to what they are facing in their daily life.